A lot of announcements coming off of the live letter this weekend. You were fundamentally surprised. I think the concern going into the live letter was there was going to be a lot of frustrated gamers who are just waiting for news, and the bigger announcements would be coming at FanFest on July the 28th of this year. But why don't you break down what changed with this gearing system basic overhaul that is coming with 6.4, and why are they making these changes?
So one of the frustrations in Final Fantasy XIV is that it is very hard to gear an alternate class. Final Fantasy XIV is a game where you can play every single class, as most games would call them, on a single character. And what that means is you might want to jump into different content on different classes. Now, historically, they're on a vertical progression system that updates once every 8 months with the new raid tier. And so since you don't get a raid tier for 8 months, that's plenty of time to acquire multiple sets. However, this expansion being a double ultimate expansion, that is where we introduce the hardest content to clear in the game that is tied to the very same set that comes out with the raid, but on the odd numbered patches, which means now you need to go into an ultimate progression at month 4. And so that has meant that players have felt a lot of pressure if they wanted to change classes that they rated in Savage to something that they did in Ultimate. So even more so than just the typical 8-month stress, where there's already the stress of each week I have to choose which class I want to gear if I only have one character. That's already annoying that I have to just keep clearing and clearing and clearing. But it also has put additional pressure in that there are people who realize that their main raid group doesn't want to do Ultimate together. So they go find a new Ultimate group and they're expected to be geared differently. And so there's just been a lot of burnout this expansion because we've had some really tightly tuned Savage and Ultimate fights. And so you've already got people that are just pushed against what they can handle as far as progressing the content. The idea that they need to continue re-clearing the content after that to make sure that their gearing's where it is has just kind of burned people out. So what I expected was if they were going to make a change to gearing, just like when they made a change to staggering the release of a raid until the week after a patch so that people can enjoy the main content before they feel that they need to get into their raid progression, I thought that would be something that would be rolled out at FanFest, if at all, for the next expansion, which is next year and will be announced July 28th. We'll find out the name and all that. But instead, with the second live announcement going into patch 6.4, the fourth of 5 patches supporting this expansion, they've announced with our final tier of our raid, they are adjusting the loot now. They are reducing, the loot is basically done through a token system, and they're reducing the number of tokens it takes by 25% per slot. And so you have these different tiers of tokens, and that determines which slot you can buy on gear. And they are changing that. That's the biggest change. There's some other changes to it as well. The chess pieces are going to be available from the back 2 fights, not just the final fight. But long term, depending on the tier, some people don't clear the 3rd fight as often as they clear the 4th fight. So like that'll make a difference to people who clear all 4 fights every week, starting very early on in the progression. And then the 4th piece, the 4th and final one, can also be downgraded once we get to where there's too many of those lying around. So like a lot of that will change the way the fight ages. But the bigger thing is up front, we're going to be gearing a lot faster. And that will get people into either feeling that they can take a break sooner, or it'll get people into gearing their alts sooner. So it's a massive, massive shift from what it is. It leaves the weapon where it used to be, but from the armor, it's a drastic reduction in kind of your gear pacing. And anybody who's played any MMORPG, you can basically calculate the number of weeks that you either theoretically or exactly need, depending on the game, before you are best in slot. So the content releases, we immediately push ourselves into what is the best acquirable as of that day, and then you basically slowly progress towards best in slot overall. And that's the big change. And they rolled that out mid-expansion with really no warning in a second live letter. We get 2 for every patch for the final tier of a. It's just a drastic change.
Yeah. Do you think there's like another game that he wants you to maybe take a break and go play?
I mean, he definitely noted that this would mean that a patch that releases May 23rd, that people would probably be done in kind of that 4 to 6 week range, maybe, which means that you would be done like around, let's say like June 22nd ish.
Yeah.
As like a
theoretical date.
Which, June 22nd just happens to be the date that Final Fantasy 16 comes out. But like Yoshi was not on the sound check because when he sat down after the sound check, he still had his Switch in hand from playing Zelda. So in all seriousness, he just said like, there's a lot of great games this year. And like, if you are tired of playing 14, but have a goal, we should get you through that goal so that you can only play 14 when you want to play 14.
Right.
You should not be sitting here feeling pressure to progress a fight to the point that you can farm it and then farm a fight until you're done getting all your loot, even though you like hate it. You should feel that you can achieve whatever you set out to. So like it's funny to joke about the fact that like it's just in time for 16, but in all seriousness, this is something that affects the game moving forward. This affects the game going into 7.0, going into 8.0. I mean, this is a massive departure.
Yeah, I agreed. Unless you own a house, and then congrats, I guess, if you've been able to get through the lottery, and so much more. But it's going to be interesting. I'm personally very excited about 16. I think what I want to do is I want to play through Final Fantasy IV on the PS5 here coming up. I'm just needing to find some time to do so. But 16, I think, is going to be very promising. I'm excited for this. I'm wondering, it'll be interesting to see what lessons are learned and what feedback that they get from this, because I know that gearing alts has been a big point of contention and concern, especially when we talked about this, I think several months ago, in terms of imagine running in and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need you to switch to another role. And then you're like, oh, I'm perpetually going to be behind y'all. Like there's no way to catch up outside of just time. And that seems to solve this because you end up being able to get more things and then use them in different areas. So even if that becomes a possibility, you could actually probably sit on some of the items themselves. And then if that happened and you kept rating, and then, in week 4, all of a sudden you could be like, oh, cool. I can augment this. I can do that. And then I can go forward from there. So it's going to be cool.
There's some weird stuff like late in a tier when somebody wants to just help out and they go to help somebody and they're like, hey, we need a healer. And you're like, I'd be willing to be a healer. And then they've got the minimum gear score set too high. And you're like, well, I'm not going to grind up a whole nother healer set just so I can help people. And so as they reduce the number of weeks, hopefully that also increases the number of people who are like better geared across multiple roles. So there will still be world first raiders that will use multiple characters for this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's still gonna happen.
That's the, like, if you really are that hardcore, then you have that at least 3 characters, one for the roles.
Like I had trouble even watching the world first race for WoW this time because the number of splits has just gotten so out of control that it's not fun to watch. Like I checked in multiple times over hours and it's like I'm not even seeing raid progression. I was like, I'll just come back later. And it's just like I literally just keep coming in to be part of this party. And it just feels like every time I come in, they're like, oh, we're just putting some stuff in the oven right now, and then we're gonna vacuum the living room. You know what? I feel like I'm intruding. I'll come back later for the party. And then I come back later and they're like, oh, well, now we're cleaning our pool and tidying up our garage. Is there a party? Like, did I just come into your house on a random day? Like, I don't. So I think that moving further from splits is also healthier long-term for gamers as a whole. I mean, it means that it's easier to unsubscribe from the game. So I don't know if it's commercially helpful to 14 or not, but it definitely feels healthier for gamers.
I think the thing is that I don't think it's a question of that financial health that gamers take breaks. I think the bigger problem that Yoshi P and a lot of people maybe don't recognize, but Yoshi P did, is that playing through burnout and getting to the point where you're like, I'm never touching this game again, is a lot bigger hit on the finances, as opposed to like saying, all right, I'll be back in, whatever period of time. And there are people who don't want to take breaks. And then those are the ones I think run and feel that friction, as opposed to saying like, yep, I've done all that I wanted to do. I'll see you guys, whenever the next opportune time is. And we've seen that. Like, you see people coming into the game at all points of time. Not everybody rides hype waves. Some people like to play behind that wave. And that's really, I think, a good thing, a good and healthy thing. And the important thing is that 14 just keeps making content. So when the next expansion drops, if after the expansion, everybody's like, but I came in right before the expansion and there was all this content. Where's the content after, that's the cycle. Just note that you might be a player who shouldn't play on the hype wave. You should wait till that wave is finished. And then you can sit here and just like enjoy like so much more things that are going on when that's happening. But who knows? I mean, I think Final Fantasy XIV has been very financially viable. And the latest, some other announcements that have been coming out is that Square Enix is intending to use their mobile and their Final Fantasy MMO subscriptions to maybe fund more Final Fantasy games, which I think is an important thing. If you don't like 16, the answer to that should be 17. Like the answer should be like, hey, remember when we would get a Final Fantasy game like every 2 years and everybody's like, oh, I really didn't like 8, or maybe I loved 8 and I didn't really care for this number. Like, and that debate continues. The longer that's been stretched out, I think that means more pressure on Final Fantasy to be the game for everybody. 15 had to be good, but it tried to also be a game and do all these things. I think 16 will piss some people off, and that's okay. And it would be really good if they were able to take that feedback and say, hey, by the way, you know, we're making a shift, and now here's 17. Oh, now here's 18. Like we're back into this cadence where Final Fantasy 14 is the only one that does it. Every 2 years, there's a new Final Fantasy, and in terms of its expansion. And outside of that, what else is going on? Anyway, Chris, you got any final thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
No, this week I'd like to clear the last of the story that I've never done in the game. So that's the Evil East raids and the Four Lords. That's all of the mainline lore, like lore that I expect, you know, the vast majority of players have cleared, that I don't know. So that's what I plan on doing this week. I'm just going to kind of chip away at it. I'm excited. I achieved a bunch of stuff in WoW this weekend. I did a bunch of Diablo. I've finished up my first ever PvP series in 14. Ooh. I keep saying I'm going to get to 25, and like I grind like 15 or 20 ranks in like the first week, and then I just stop. And the series expires, and I'm like, oh, oops. Yeah. Oops. So I finally did it.
Hey, congratulations. All right, guys, if you want, go hang out with Chris over on Twitch as he continues his day. You can talk about anything we talked about here today or anything else you want to talk about. And we'll be back tomorrow. I want to talk to you about the WoW Classic Hardcore mode that they're adding in, and who knows what other news might be breaking as we're building up to Summer Game Fest. There should be lots of things to discuss. So, guys, if you have anything you want us to cover specifically, set off in Discord or in the comments, and hopefully you guys are enjoying it. Thank you guys so much for the likes on this. And we're going to go ahead and broadcast and wave it out. And I'm going to wish you guys all the very best. We'll see you next time.